The conversation with Natalie replayed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't escape from. I sat there in the darkness of our Denver home, the phone still warm in my trembling hand, trying to process words that seemed designed to shatter my reality. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. Her voice had been so casual, so matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather rather than dismantling someone's entire life. The way she'd said my name, Amanda, honey, with that condescending sweetness that made my skin crawl, like she was doing me a favor, like she was the reasonable one in this situation. I think you need to know the truth, she'd said, and I almost laughed at the irony now, the truth, as if truth had anything to do with what she was selling. According to Natalie's carefully constructed narrative, I was the problem in my own marriage. I was the one being clingy by, and this was the part that made my blood boil, by supporting my husband through his MBA program, by working extra consulting projects to help pay for his executive education courses at the business school, by believing him when he said those weekend strategy sessions were crucial for his career advancement. Clingy for making sure he had everything he needed to succeed. Clingy for being a devoted wife. The details she knew were what disturbed me most. She knew about the color-coded filing system I'd created for Tyler's business proposals. She knew that I always made sure his presentations were printed and bound the night before important meetings. She knew the name of the marriage counselor we'd seen 2 years ago when Tyler was stressed about switching from corporate consulting to starting his own firm. These weren't things you picked up from casual pillow talk. These were intimate details of a shared life, details that could only come from someone who had been given a complete briefing. Tyler hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been giving her ammunition, feeding her information about our private life like he was preparing her for battle. Tyler says you two have been having problems for years, Natalie had continued, her voice taking on that sharp edge that betrayed her youth and insecurity, that you're more like business partners than a married couple. He needs someone who inspires him creatively, who understands his vision, someone who can actually keep up with him intellectually. That line had hit like a physical blow. I had a master's degree in business strategy. I'd been the one who helped Tyler develop the framework for his consulting firm. I'd spent countless nights brainstorming with him, refining his pitch decks, connecting him with potential clients from my own network. And now, apparently, I couldn't keep up with him intellectually? But the cruelest part, the part that made my chest tighten with a pain I'd never experienced before, was when she said, he wants to build something meaningful with someone who hasn't already peaked in their career, someone who still has that hunger, that drive, someone who's still on their way up. At 34, I was apparently past my prime? Never mind that I'd just been promoted to senior partner at my consulting firm. Never mind that I'd built a reputation as one of the top strategists in Denver's tech sector. Never mind that clients specifically requested me for their most complex projects. According to Natalie's version of reality, I was settled, complacent, and holding Tyler back from his true potential. The age comment stung in ways I hadn't expected. Natalie was 27, fresh out of graduate school, working as a junior analyst at a venture capital firm where Tyler had been pitching his startup idea. 7 years younger than me. Young enough that she probably doesn't remember the financial crisis that had shaped my early career. Young enough that she'd never had to fight for credibility in boardrooms full of men who assumed she was there to take notes. Young enough to believe that youth itself was an accomplishment. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, she'd said, though every word had been carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. I'm just being honest because I think you deserve to know where things stand. Tyler and I are planning a future together. We're talking about launching a startup, maybe moving to San Francisco where the real opportunities are. It would be easier for everyone if you could just let go gracefully. Let go gracefully, as if 7 years of marriage, of partnership, of building a life together could be dismissed with such casual cruelty, as if I was some outdated business model that needed to be phased out for a newer version. But what struck me most powerfully as I sat there in the dark wasn't the betrayal itself.
It was the realization of how carefully this had been orchestrated. This wasn't a confession. This wasn't even a warning. This was a strategic move designed to destabilize me emotionally and position me as the obstacle to their happiness. Natalie had called me at 2 in the morning specifically because she wanted me off balance, emotional, and reactive. She delivered her speech with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed it, who had thought through every word and every angle. The casual cruelty wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated.
They wanted the crazy ex-wife who couldn't let go. They wanted me to make a scene, to send desperate texts, to show up at Tyler's office making accusations. They wanted evidence of my instability that they could use to justify their narrative that the marriage had been broken long before Natalie entered the picture. I thought back over the past 10 months, seeing patterns I'd been too trusting to recognize. The way Tyler had started staying late at networking events that never seemed to result in any actual business connections. The weekend mentorship sessions with young entrepreneurs that required him to be out of communication for hours at a time. The sudden interest in fitness and fashion, the new cologne, the carefully curated social media presence that somehow never included photos of me anymore. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. But more than the affair itself, I was beginning to understand something more sinister. Tyler hadn't just fallen in love with someone else. He'd been systematically rewriting our history, recasting our marriage as a failure to justify his exit strategy. Every sacrifice I'd made, every way I'd supported his dreams was being twisted into evidence of my inadequacy. When I'd worked those extra consulting projects to help pay for his MBA, he'd apparently told Natalie that I was obsessed with money and status. When I'd encouraged him to pursue his startup dreams instead of staying in corporate consulting, he'd framed it as me pushing him away from stability. When I'd suggested the marriage counseling 2 years ago to help us communicate better during his career transition, he'd positioned it as proof that I was unable to handle his success. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. I walked through our house as dawn began to break over the Denver skyline, seeing everything with new clarity. The home office I'd helped him set up, filled with equipment I'd purchased. The framed photo from our wedding day, tucked behind a stack of business books where visitors wouldn't immediately notice it. The guest room we'd talked about converting into a nursery someday, now serving as storage for his startup inventory. Every corner held evidence of a partnership I thought we were building together, but according to their narrative, I was just a phase in Tyler's journey, a stepping stone to his real life that was waiting to begin with someone younger, fresher, more inspiring. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I felt something shift inside me. The initial shock was giving way to something else, not just anger, though that was certainly there, not just hurt, though the pain was overwhelming. It was clarity. For months, maybe longer, I'd been feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Little inconsistencies in Tyler's stories that I'd brushed aside, gaps in his schedule that didn't quite add up, a growing sense that something was off, but no concrete evidence to point to. I'd started to wonder if I was becoming paranoid, if the stress of my own career was making me imagine problems that didn't exist. Now, I understood. I hadn't been losing my mind. I'd been responding rationally to a coordinated gaslighting campaign. Tyler and Natalie hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been collaborating on a psychological operation designed to make me question my own perceptions and memories. But they'd made one critical mistake. In their arrogance, in their certainty that I was too trusting and too naive to see what was happening, they underestimated something fundamental about my nature. I was a strategy consultant. My entire career was built on analyzing complex situations, identifying patterns, and developing systematic responses to challenging problems. I'd helped dozens of companies navigate crises, restructure failing ventures, and turn around seemingly impossible situations. And now, standing in my living room as the morning light flooded through the windows, I realized that this was just another strategic challenge.
The difference was that this time, it was personal. If Natalie wanted to position herself as the innocent other woman being harassed by a crazy wife, she was welcome to try. If Tyler wanted to rewrite our history to make himself the victim of my supposed emotional unavailability, he could attempt it. But they were about to learn something important about me. I didn't get to senior partner at one of Denver's top consulting firms by being naive or easy to manipulate. I got there by being thorough, methodical, and absolutely relentless when I identified a problem that needed solving. And right now, the problem I needed to solve was exposing the truth before their carefully constructed lies became the accepted reality. I picked up my phone and opened a new note. At the top, I wrote, "Evidence Collection Plan." Below it, I began listing everything I needed to investigate, every inconsistency I needed to verify, every claim I needed to fact-check. Tyler thought he was playing chess, moving pieces strategically towards his desired outcome. What he didn't realize was that he'd been leaving breadcrumbs this entire time, and I was very, very good at following breadcrumbs to their source. The woman who had questioned her own sanity just hours ago was gone. In her place was someone who trusted her instincts enough to act on them, someone who understood that documentation and evidence would speak louder than any emotional confrontation. Natalie called me at 2 a.m. thinking she was delivering a knockout punch. What she'd actually done was wake me up, in more ways than one.
And now, they were both about to discover that the biggest mistake you can make in any strategic situation is underestimating your opponent. Hi, I'm Amanda Reed. I thought marriage meant partnership, mutual respect, and building something meaningful together. Instead, after 7 years of sacrificing my own ambitions to elevate my husband's career, his 27-year-old mistress called me at 2 a.m. to inform me that I was the obstacle standing in the way of their future. No warning, no remorse, just a cold, calculated voice telling me to step aside from a life I had spent years building. Before we continue, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if this story hits close to home, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's video is going to be even more powerful. I had funded Tyler's MBA program at one of the top business schools in Colorado. I had taken on extra consulting projects, working 70-hour weeks to cover tuition, living expenses, and the networking events that he insisted were essential for his future success. I had postponed my own dreams of starting a consulting practice focused on women-led businesses so he could have the financial stability to take risks with his startup ideas. I had turned down a lucrative partnership offer in Seattle because Tyler said he needed to stay in Denver where his professional network was strongest. And somehow, in the twisted reality that he and Natalie had constructed, I was the one holding him back from his true potential. It started 7 years ago at a business conference in Austin. I was there representing my consulting firm, presenting a workshop on strategic planning for mid-sized tech companies. Tyler was in the audience, recently promoted to senior consultant at a corporate strategy firm, hungry to make his mark in the industry. We met at the networking reception afterward. He approached me with questions about my presentation, and what started as a professional conversation evolved into something more. He was charming, ambitious, articulate about his vision for the future of business consulting. He talked about wanting to break away from corporate constraints and build something innovative, something that would actually help companies transform rather than just producing reports that gathered dust on executive shelves. I was drawn to his passion, his energy, his certainty that he was meant to do something significant. Within 6 months, we were engaged. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony in the mountains outside Denver, surrounded by friends and colleagues who toasted to our future as a power couple in the consulting world. The first 2 years were good. We were both building our careers, supporting each other's ambitions, celebrating each other's wins. When I landed a major client that significantly boosted my profile in the industry, Tyler was genuinely proud. When he was selected for a prestigious leadership development program, I helped him prepare his application materials and celebrated with him when the acceptance came through.
But then Tyler started talking about getting his MBA. Not just any MBA, he wanted to attend the elite executive program at Denver's top business school, the kind that cost 6 figures and required a significant time commitment. He was convinced it would give him the credibility and network he needed to launch his own firm. I supported the idea immediately. I believed in his vision, in his potential to build something meaningful. We crunched the numbers together, created a budget, made a plan. I would take on additional consulting work to supplement our income. We would postpone having children for a few years until he finished the program and got his business off the ground. We would make sacrifices in the short term for long-term success. What I didn't realize at the time was that we would actually mean I. For 2 years, I worked constantly. My typical week involved 3 to 4 client projects simultaneously, each requiring detailed analysis, strategy development, and presentation preparation. I would wake up at 5 in the morning to get work done before Tyler needed the home office for his studies. I would take client calls during my lunch breaks and work late into the evening after he'd gone to bed. I paid for his textbooks, his professional association memberships, his new wardrobe for networking events. I covered our mortgage, utilities, and groceries while he focused on his studies. When he stressed about group projects or difficult professors, I stayed up late helping him brainstorm solutions and edit his papers. I became his support system, his cheerleader, his safety net. And I did it willingly because I believed we were investing in our shared future. After Tyler graduated with his MBA, he was energized and full of plans. He wanted to leave his corporate consulting job and launch his own boutique firm focused on helping startups scale effectively. It was risky, no guaranteed income, no benefits, no security. But I believed in him, and I had the financial stability to support us through the transition.
For another year, I carried us financially while Tyler built his client base. I connected him with contacts from my network, introduced him to potential clients, even brought him in as a subcontractor on some of my own projects to help him build his portfolio. When he landed his first major client, I celebrated like it was my own victory. Because, in a way, it was. I had invested years of my life, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and countless hours of emotional labor into making his success possible. But somewhere along the way, the narrative changed. Tyler started describing his journey differently in professional settings. He talked about the sacrifices he had made to pursue his vision, the risks he had taken to build something from nothing. He positioned himself as a self-made entrepreneur who had bet on himself and won. I noticed that I appeared less and less in his origin story. When people asked how he'd managed the financial risk of starting his own firm, he would talk vaguely about careful planning and strategic savings, without mentioning that those savings came entirely from my income. When clients complimented his credentials, he would talk about his MBA and his previous corporate experience, without acknowledging that I had made both possible. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. His success was our success. We were a team, even if the public narrative focused more on his individual achievement. But gradually, I began to feel less like a partner and more like infrastructure. Essential but invisible, valuable but taken for granted. The marriage counseling 2 years ago should have been a warning sign. Tyler had been acting distant, distracted, increasingly critical of minor things I did or didn't do. I suggested we see someone to improve our communication to make sure we stayed connected during this intense phase of his career building. The counselor asked us both what we needed from the relationship. I talked about wanting to feel appreciated, to feel like my contributions were valued, to maintain the sense of partnership we'd had in the early years. Tyler talked about needing space to grow, about feeling constrained by expectations, about wanting a partner who was more aligned with his evolving vision. At the time, I interpreted his words as stress about his new business. I tried to give him more space, to be more understanding of his need for independence. I stopped asking detailed questions about his day. I stopped expecting him to reciprocate the emotional support I provided. I made myself smaller, less demanding, more accommodating.
Looking back now, I can see that the counseling wasn't about improving our marriage. It was about Tyler establishing a paper trail of marital dissatisfaction that he could later use to justify his exit strategy. Every concern he raised, every complaint he made, was being filed away as evidence that our marriage had been failing long before Natalie entered the picture. The guest room that we'd talked about converting into a nursery remained untouched. Every few months, I would bring up the idea of starting a family, and Tyler would have another reason why the timing wasn't right. First, it was the MBA program, too much stress, too little time. Then it was launching the business, too much financial uncertainty, too much risk. Then it was scaling the business, too many demands on his time and energy. I was 34 years old, watching my window for having children gradually close, while my husband always had another reason to wait. But I trusted that we were working toward a shared future, that these sacrifices were temporary, that eventually we would get to the life we had planned together. What I didn't know was that Tyler had already moved on to planning a different future with someone else. Someone younger, someone who hadn't seen him struggle, someone who could look at his current success without remembering all the failures and false starts along the way. Someone who didn't represent his past sacrifices, but rather his future possibilities. Natalie had entered his life 10 months ago when Tyler was pitching his startup idea to the venture capital firm where she worked as a junior analyst. He came home excited after that first meeting, talking about how impressed the firm had been with his presentation, how seriously they were considering his proposal, how this could be the break he'd been waiting for. He started having regular meetings with the firm, strategy sessions to refine his pitch and develop his business model. He would be gone for hours, sometimes entire days, working on what he described as the opportunity of a lifetime. I encouraged him fully, proud that my years of support were finally paying off in the form of serious investor interest. What I didn't know was that those strategy sessions increasingly involved only one analyst from the firm, that the business discussions were gradually becoming something else entirely, that Tyler was building not just a startup pitch, but a whole new life that didn't include me. I had given him 7 years. 7 years of my prime earning potential, my career advancement, my own dreams and ambitions. I had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in his education and business ventures. I had provided emotional support through every setback and celebration for every victory. And now, according to Natalie's 2 a.m. phone call, all of that made me clingy, obsessive, and unable to let go of a relationship that Tyler had apparently outgrown. As I stood in our Denver home that morning, watching the sun rise over the mountains, I thought about everything I had sacrificed. The partnership in Seattle I had turned down, the consulting practice focused on women-led businesses that I had postponed, the years of working 70-hour weeks while Tyler pursued his dreams, the children I didn't have because the timing was never quite right for his career.
But I also thought about something else: documentation. Because throughout all of those years of sacrifice, I had been meticulous about our finances. Every tuition payment, every business expense, every dollar I had contributed to building Tyler's success was carefully recorded in our joint accounts, in tax returns, in credit card statements. I was a strategy consultant. Being thorough wasn't just my professional skill, it was my nature. And Tyler was about to learn that the same meticulous attention to detail that had helped build his career was going to be the tool that exposed his betrayal. The rain hammered against the windows of our Denver townhouse as I sat motionless in the darkness, my phone still clutched in my hand. The glowing numbers on the microwave read 2:34 a.m. In just 17 minutes, that phone call from Natalie had taken everything I thought I knew about my life and turned it inside out. Her voice kept replaying in my mind, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage while maintaining a veneer of concern. The way she'd started with, "Amanda, honey," that false intimacy designed to establish her position of power, she wasn't calling as the guilty party seeking forgiveness. She was calling as someone who believed she had already won. "I think it's time someone told you the truth about your marriage," she had said, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor.
Tyler and I have been together for 10 months now. He's been trying to figure out how to tell you, but honestly, you're making it really difficult with how you monitor his every move. Monitor his every move? The accusation had landed like a punch to the stomach. I had been monitoring him by asking about his day, by wanting to stay connected to my own husband, by noticing when his stories didn't quite line up. Apparently, basic interest in your spouse's life now qualified as surveillance. He told me how you check his calendar obsessively, Natalie continued, her voice taking on an edge of judgment. How you get upset when he has evening meetings or weekend networking events. How you've become increasingly paranoid about his female colleagues. It's really suffocating for him, Amanda. He needs space to breathe, to grow, to be himself. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I actually questioned myself. Had I been too interested in his schedule? Too concerned about his late nights at the office? But then I remembered, I had only started paying closer attention because things hadn't been adding up. The venture capital firm supposedly interested in his startup had never followed up with formal meetings. The networking events never seemed to generate actual business leads. The weekend strategy sessions never produced any visible work product. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been observant. There's a difference. Tyler says you two have been growing apart for years, Natalie pressed on, warming to her narrative, that you're so focused on your own career that you don't really support his ambitions anymore. He says you're always working, always too busy or too tired to really be present with him. He needs a partner who's actually invested in his success, who believes in his vision, someone who hasn't already achieved everything they want and settled into complacency. The irony was almost laughable. I was too focused on my career, the career I had deliberately kept stable and high-earning so Tyler could take risks with his business ventures. I was always working to pay our bills while he built his startup. I didn't support his ambitions, the ambitions I had funded with my MBA tuition payments and sustained with my 6-figure salary. But what truly chilled me was the level of detail she knew. She mentioned how I organized our home office with separate filing systems for his business documents and mine. She knew that I had suggested Tyler consider getting an executive coach last year to help with his leadership development. She even referenced a specific argument we'd had 3 months ago about whether to attend my colleague's wedding or Tyler's business school reunion on the same weekend. These weren't details you learned from casual conversation. These were intimate specifics of a marriage, the kind of information that could only come from Tyler systematically briefing her on our private life. He hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been building a case against me, gathering evidence, preparing Natalie with ammunition. Look, I know this is hard to hear, Natalie said, and I could hear the satisfaction barely concealed beneath her fake sympathy. But Tyler and I are serious about each other. We're planning to move to San Francisco together, actually. There's a much better startup ecosystem there, more sophisticated investors who really understand his vision. We've already started looking at apartments in the Mission District. San Francisco, the city where I had been offered that partnership 3 years ago, the opportunity I had turned down because Tyler insisted his network was in Denver. Now he was planning to move there with someone else, chasing the same opportunities I had sacrificed for his benefit. He's going to ask for a separation when he gets back from his business trip next week, Natalie continued, her voice matter-of-fact, now businesslike. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I actually feel bad for you. You seem like a nice woman, just stuck in the past, unable to accept that people evolve and grow in different directions. Tyler needs someone who's evolving with him, not holding him back. The cruelty of that statement was breathtaking. I was stuck in the past where I had worked 70-hour weeks to fund his MBA. I was holding him back by providing the financial foundation that allowed him to take entrepreneurial risks without consequences.
But then Natalie delivered what she clearly thought was the knockout punch. He told me about the fertility issues you've been having, how you've been pressuring him to have kids when he's not ready, when his business needs his full attention. He feels guilty about it, but honestly, he's relieved that it hasn't happened. He wants to start a family with someone who's more aligned with his timeline, someone who hasn't already spent their best years focused on corporate achievement. My fertility issues? We had been trying to conceive for the past year, and each negative pregnancy test had been devastating for both of us. Or so I had thought. Apparently, while I was mourning our inability to start a family, Tyler was secretly relieved and already planning to have children with someone else. Someone younger, someone whose best years weren't supposedly behind her. I was 34 years old. I had a thriving career, excellent health, and plenty of time to have children. But according to their narrative, I was already past my prime, already less desirable than a 27-year-old who was still in the early stages of her career. I know you're probably upset right now, Natalie concluded, and I could hear her preparing to end the call, having delivered her message. But honestly, this is for the best. You deserve someone who's at your level, someone who's ready to settle down and be comfortable. Tyler needs someone with more energy, more ambition, more hunger for success. It's not personal, Amanda. It's just reality. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting in the darkness with those words echoing in my mind. Not personal, just reality. For the first hour after that call, I sat completely still, my mind racing through memories and re-examining them with this new information. The business trip Tyler was currently on, supposedly to meet with potential investors in Austin, was that real, or was he actually with Natalie? The late-night strategy sessions over the past 10 months, how many of those had been real work versus time spent with her? Every loving gesture, every word of encouragement, every sacrifice I had made was now tainted with the question, how long had he been planning this? At what point had he decided I was no longer useful to his ambitions and started looking for my replacement? But as the shock began to wear off, something else started to emerge. Not just hurt or anger, though both of those emotions were certainly present. It was a cold, clear realization of what had actually happened here. This phone call wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a guilty conscience prompting a confession. It was a calculated move in a larger strategy. Natalie had called me at 2 a.m. specifically to catch me at my most vulnerable, most emotional, most likely to react poorly. She had delivered her message with just enough cruelty to provoke a response, to make me angry or desperate or irrational. They wanted me to fall apart. They wanted me to send frantic texts, show up at Tyler's office making scenes, call Natalie's employer to complain about her. They wanted evidence of the crazy, clingy wife narrative they had been constructing. Every emotional reaction I had would be used as proof that Tyler was right to leave me, that I was unstable and suffocating and impossible to live with. The gaslighting wasn't just about making me doubt my own perceptions. It was about provoking me into behaviors that would confirm their false narrative about who I was. I walked through our townhouse as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, seeing everything differently now. The photo from our wedding day, displayed prominently when we first moved in, had gradually migrated to a less visible shelf. The vision board we had created together during the first year of our marriage, covered with images of our shared dreams, had disappeared entirely from the home office. My business books had been relegated to a corner bookshelf while Tyler's took pride of place. Slowly, methodically, I had been erased from the narrative of our shared life, and I had been too busy working to fund his dreams to notice it happening. But they had made one critical error in their strategy. They had underestimated me fundamentally. They saw a woman who had sacrificed her own ambitions for her husband's success and assumed that made me weak, compliant, easy to manipulate. They saw someone who trusted her partner and interpreted that as naivete. What they failed to understand is that trust isn't the same as blindness.
And sacrifice isn't the same as surrender. I had built a career analyzing complex business situations, identifying patterns, and developing strategic responses. I had helped dozens of companies navigate crises where the stated problem was never the actual problem, where you had to dig beneath surface explanations to find the real dynamics at play. This situation was no different. The affair wasn't the real problem. It was a symptom of a much larger pattern of manipulation and exploitation. Tyler hadn't just fallen in love with someone else. He had systematically used me to build his success, rewritten our history to position himself as the victim, and was now attempting to exit the marriage while preserving his reputation and assets. As the sun rose over Denver, I opened my laptop and created a new folder, Documentation. Inside, I began organizing files I had been maintaining for years without realizing they would become evidence. Tax returns showing my income supporting us through his MBA, bank statements showing my payments for his tuition and business expenses, emails where he thanked me for my support and promised we were building something together.
I had 7 years of documentation showing exactly what I had contributed to Tyler's success. And more importantly, I had the skills to investigate whether his current story about the investors, about the business trip, about his professional activities was any more true than the Morrison case had been in that other woman's story. Natalie thought she had delivered a knockout blow with that phone call. What she had actually done was hand me the motivation I needed to stop trusting and start verifying, to stop making excuses for inconsistencies and start demanding proof. They wanted the crazy wife. They were about to get the strategic consultant instead, and that was going to be their first big mistake. The morning after Natalie's call, I waited until a reasonable hour before making my first move. Not because I was hesitant, but because I needed to approach this methodically. Emotional reactions were exactly what they wanted from me. Strategic planning was what they wouldn't expect. At 8:30 a.m., I called Tyler's business partner, Marcus Chen. Wait, I couldn't use that name. I called Tyler's business partner, Daniel Brooks, the man he'd brought on 6 months ago to help scale the consulting firm. Daniel and I had always had a cordial professional relationship. He didn't know about the personal crisis unfolding, which made him the perfect source of unbiased information. "Amanda, good morning," Daniel answered, sounding surprised. "Everything okay?" "Hi, Daniel. Yes, just trying to coordinate some scheduling. Tyler mentioned he's in Austin meeting with potential investors this week. I wanted to send him some documents he forgot, but I realize I don't have the name of the firm he's meeting with. Do you have that information?" There was a pause on the other end. "Austin? Tyler's not in Austin. He told me he was taking a few personal days. Said you two were dealing with some family matters and he needed time off." My grip tightened on the phone, but I kept my voice steady. "Oh, I must have gotten my wires crossed. Family matters, right. Thanks, Daniel. Is everything all right?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "Everything's fine, just pregnancy brain. You know how it is." The lie came easily, and it served a purpose. Planting the seed that I was potentially pregnant would make Tyler look even worse later if needed. After hanging up, I sat back and processed this first confirmation. Tyler wasn't in Austin on a business trip. He'd lied to both his business partner and to me, creating separate false stories for each of us. The question was, where was he really, and who was he with? I opened my laptop and logged into our shared credit card account. The one Tyler didn't know I still had access to because I'd set it up years ago and maintained the primary account holder status. My hands moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up the transaction history for the past week. There it was. A charge from 2 days ago at the Riverside Inn, an upscale boutique hotel in Boulder, about 40 minutes from Denver. The amount? $487 for a 2-night stay. Another charge at Celestial, one of Boulder's most expensive farm-to-table restaurants, $243. A charge at a wine bar called the Vintage Room, $156. Tyler was in Boulder, not Austin, and he was spending money like someone trying to impress a companion. I pulled up the credit card history for the past 10 months, and a pattern emerged that made my stomach turn.
Charges at restaurants I'd never been to on evenings when Tyler claimed to be working late at the office. Hotel charges in nearby mountain towns on weekends when he said he was attending business conferences. Charges at a jewelry store in Cherry Creek. $892 spent 3 months ago on what was definitely not a gift for me. But the most damning evidence was the pattern of charges at coffee shops and lunch spots near the venture capital firm where Natalie worked. Multiple transactions per week, always during business hours, always at the same handful of locations. This wasn't occasional business meetings. This was a routine, a relationship conducted in plain sight but hidden in the innocuous category of business expenses. I photographed every single transaction with my phone, creating a visual timeline of Tyler's deception. Then I cross-referenced these charges with his calendar, the shared calendar we'd maintained for years to coordinate our schedules. Every hotel charge corresponded to a weekend when his calendar had shown executive leadership retreat or industry conference. Every expensive dinner corresponded to a night marked client development dinner or investor meeting. The coffee shop charges lined up perfectly with calendar entries that read strategy session or pitch refinement meeting. Tyler had been meticulous in his deception, creating a false digital trail that looked legitimate on the surface. What he hadn't counted on was that I would have the financial records that told a different story. Next, I turned my attention to Natalie herself. A quick LinkedIn search revealed her professional history. Bachelor's degree in finance from Colorado State, graduated 3 years ago, junior analyst position at Summit Ridge Ventures for the past 18 months. Before that, an internship at a smaller investment firm in Fort Collins. Her LinkedIn profile was carefully curated to project ambition and sophistication. Professional headshot, detailed descriptions of her analytical work, recommendations from colleagues praising her strategic thinking and client relationship skills. She had 847 connections, many of them young professionals in Denver's startup and investment community. But what caught my attention was a post she had made 6 months ago. Excited to be working on a groundbreaking new startup evaluation. Sometimes the best investments are in people, not just products. Hashtag venture capital, hashtag startup life, hashtag believe in vision.
6 months ago, right around the time Tyler's calendar started showing an increase in meetings with Summit Ridge Ventures. I clicked through to the comments, and there, among the congratulatory responses from her professional network, was a comment from Tyler's business account. Great minds think alike, looking forward to continued collaboration. They had been publicly interacting for months, hidden in plain sight on a professional platform where their communication looked entirely legitimate. I screenshotted every interaction I could find between them on LinkedIn, comments on each other's posts, mutual connections they'd made through each other, professional groups they'd both joined around the same time. Then I moved to Instagram. Natalie's account was public, filled with the carefully curated aesthetic of a young professional woman, artfully photographed brunches, scenic mountain hikes, cocktails at trendy bars, inspirational quotes about ambition and success overlaid on sunset photos. I scrolled back through 10 months of posts, and there, hidden among the lifestyle content, were clues. A photo of coffee and a laptop at a cafe I recognized from the credit card statements, captioned Monday Morning Motivation. A picture of Boulder's flat irons at sunset, posted on a weekend when Tyler's calendar showed an industry conference and the credit card showed a hotel charge in Boulder. A selfie at Celestial Restaurant with the caption, Celebrating New Beginnings, posted the same night as that $243 dinner charge. She had been documenting their relationship the entire time, but in a way that was deniable, that looked like the normal social media activity of a young professional. No photos of Tyler, no direct mentions of a relationship, but a digital breadcrumb trail that corroborated the financial evidence. I went back further in her Instagram history, before Tyler entered her life. The tone of her posts was different, more casual, less polished. Lots of photos with friends, nights out, casual dating references. Then, about 10 months ago, the aesthetic shifted. Posts became more aspirational, more focused on success and ambition, more about leveling up and manifesting your best life. It was the timeline of someone who had met an older, seemingly successful man and was reinventing herself to fit into his world.
But the real breakthrough came when I searched for her previous employer, the investment firm in Fort Collins where she'd worked before Summit Ridge Ventures. I found an article in a local business journal from 2 years ago about challenges facing small investment firms. Buried in the article was a mention of staff turnover related to workplace relationship policies. I called the Fort Collins Chamber of Commerce, posing as a potential employer, conducting a background check. The woman I spoke with was refreshingly candid. I can't give you specific details, but I can tell you that Frontier Peak Investments implemented much stricter workplace relationship policies after an incident involving a junior analyst and a married client. The analyst left the firm shortly after. She had done this before. She had a history of getting involved with married men in professional contexts. This wasn't a spontaneous romance that had unexpectedly developed between her and Tyler. This was a pattern of behavior. Armed with this information, I turned my investigation to Tyler's supposed business activities. He'd claimed for months that Summit Ridge Ventures was seriously considering investing in his startup concept, a consulting platform that would use AI to match startups with strategic advisors. It sounded innovative and plausible, exactly the kind of thing that would attract venture capital attention. I called Summit Ridge Ventures directly, using a technique I'd learned in my consulting work. I posed as a journalist writing an article about emerging trends in startup investing for a business publication. I'm particularly interested in your firm's approach to AI-enabled consulting platforms, I said to the associate who answered. I understand you've been evaluating some innovative proposals in that space. AI-enabled consulting platforms? The associate sounded puzzled. That's not really our investment focus. We specialize in medical technology and sustainable consumer products. We don't typically look at consulting services or software platforms. Oh, I must have gotten my information confused, I said smoothly. Someone mentioned you were working with a consultant on evaluating this space. Tyler Reed, I believe? Tyler Reed, I could hear her typing. No, I don't see any formal engagement with that name. We have worked with several external consultants this year, but they're all in our core investment areas. Is it possible you're thinking of a different firm? I thanked her and hung up, adding this to my growing pile of evidence. Summit Ridge Ventures had never been seriously considering Tyler's startup proposal. The months of investor meetings and pitch refinements had been a fiction, a cover story that sounded legitimate enough that I wouldn't question it. Tyler's entire professional narrative for the past 10 months had been fabricated. The meetings, the opportunities, the potential investment, all of it was a constructed reality designed to justify his time away from home and his emotional distance from our marriage. But I needed one more piece of evidence, something that would be irrefutable. I logged into our shared cloud storage account, the one we'd set up years ago to back up important documents. Tyler had stopped using it regularly about a year ago, claiming he needed separate cloud storage for confidential business files, but he'd never deleted his access and he'd never changed the password. I found a folder labeled Summit Ridge Proposal Drafts and opened it. Inside were several versions of his startup pitch deck, dating back 10 months. I opened the most recent version and began reading.
The proposal was half-finished at best. Key sections were marked with notes like, need to develop this further, and placeholder, add real data. The financial projections were wildly optimistic with no realistic basis. The competitive analysis was superficial, clearly done in a few hours rather than the weeks of research he'd claimed to be conducting. This wasn't a serious business proposal that had been carefully refined through months of investor feedback. This was a rough draft that had barely evolved since its creation. Tyler hadn't never been seriously working on securing venture capital. He'd been using the pretense of building a startup as a cover story for building a relationship with Natalie. I sat back from my computer, the full scope of the deception now laid out before me in documents, transactions, and digital evidence. Tyler hadn't just been having an affair, he'd created an entire false reality. Fake business activities, fabricated investor interest, manufactured professional obligations, all to cover up the fact that he was systematically checking out of our marriage while maintaining the financial benefits of my support. And Natalie had been complicit every step of the way, providing him with the professional context he needed to make his cover story believable.
As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of our townhouse, I organized all the evidence into clearly labeled folders on my laptop. Financial evidence, timeline documentation, professional misrepresentation, digital communications, background information. I had spent 1 day investigating, and I had already accumulated enough evidence to dismantle every lie Tyler and Natalie had constructed. The question now wasn't whether I could prove they'd been deceiving me. The question was what I was going to do with that proof. Before I continue with what happened next, I need to pause and ask you something important. Have you ever been in a situation where someone completely rewrote reality right in front of your eyes? Where they took your contributions, your sacrifices, your genuine support, and somehow twisted it into evidence that you were the problem? Maybe it was a business partner who used your ideas and connections to build success, then pushed you out and claimed it was all their vision. Maybe it was a family member who borrowed money repeatedly, then got angry and called you controlling when you finally asked them to pay it back. Maybe it was a friend who you helped through their darkest times, only to have them tell everyone you were obsessive and couldn't let them move on with their life. Or maybe, like me, it was someone you loved and trusted completely, someone you built a life with, someone who convinced you that your reality wasn't real, that your memories were wrong, that your very reasonable responses to their suspicious behavior were signs of your instability. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when someone tried to gaslight you into believing you were the villain in your own story. Share your experience, because I'm learning that we need to validate each other's experiences when the world tries to tell us we're overreacting, being paranoid, or remembering things wrong. And here's what I really want to know. At what point did you realize what was happening? Was there a specific moment of clarity, or did the understanding dawn gradually? Because for me, it was that phone call at 2 a.m. That's when everything clicked into place. All the inconsistencies I've been brushing aside, all the times I questioned my judgment, all the moments when I knew something was wrong but couldn't quite put my finger on what. If you're watching this and you're currently in a situation where someone is making you feel crazy for trusting your instincts, I want you to hear this. Your instincts are probably right. When someone's behavior doesn't match their words, when their stories have inconsistencies, when you feel like you're constantly being told that your very reasonable concerns are unreasonable, that's not you being paranoid. That's you being observant. The gaslighting playbook is pretty standard, actually. First, they do something that violates trust or boundaries. Then, when you notice and express concern, they tell you you're being too sensitive, too suspicious, too controlling. They might even flip it around and accuse you of not trusting them, of being the one with the problem. Over time, you start to doubt yourself. You think, maybe I am being paranoid. Maybe I am too demanding. Maybe this is my issue to work on. And that's exactly what they want you to think. Because as long as you're questioning yourself, you're not questioning them. I spent months doing that, questioning myself instead of questioning Tyler. Every time something didn't add up, I found a way to explain it away. Every time my gut told me something was wrong, I talked myself out of it. I told myself I was being insecure, that I needed to trust more, that I was letting work stress make me paranoid about my marriage. But here's what I've learned in the days since that phone call. There's a huge difference between trusting someone and ignoring evidence. Trust is about believing in someone's character and intentions when you don't have reason to doubt them. But when you have concrete reasons to doubt, inconsistencies, lies, suspicious behavior, continuing to trust isn't actually trust. It's denial. And I had been in denial for a long time. Looking back now with clear eyes, I can see that Tyler's behavior had been changing for over a year, maybe longer. The emotional distance started before the affair did, or at least before the affair with Natalie did. He'd been pulling away gradually, becoming more critical, less engaged, more focused on perceived flaws in our relationship rather than its strengths.
Classic pre-affair behavior, I now realize. He was creating emotional distance to justify what he was planning to do.
He was building his narrative of marital dissatisfaction so that when the affair was eventually discovered, he could point to all this quote-unquote evidence that the marriage was already failing. Have any of you experienced that? Where someone starts picking fights over small things, criticizing habits they used to find endearing, bringing up old issues that were supposedly resolved years ago? That retroactive rewriting of history is a major red flag. When someone starts telling you that they've never been happy, or that they've always had doubts about issues they never mentioned before, that's not honest reflection. That's narrative construction. The thing about gaslighting is that it's incredibly effective because it exploits something good about you, your capacity for self-reflection, your willingness to consider that you might be wrong, your desire to be a reasonable person who doesn't overreact. The gaslighter takes those good qualities and weaponizes them against you. When Tyler told me I was being clingy for wanting to stay connected, he was exploiting my fear of being needy or demanding. When he suggested I was being paranoid for noticing inconsistencies in his schedule, he was exploiting my desire to be a trusting partner. When he implied I was being controlling for asking questions about his business activities, he was exploiting my wish to be supportive rather than suspicious. And it worked. For months, it worked. I made myself smaller, less questioning, more accommodating. I talked myself out of my concerns. I apologized for having perfectly reasonable expectations. I did the work of convincing myself that everything was fine so that Tyler didn't have to. That's the insidious thing about gaslighting. Eventually, the victim starts doing it to themselves. You become your own gaslighter, talking yourself out of your perceptions, dismissing your concerns before anyone else even has to. So if you're sitting there right now thinking, maybe I am overreacting, maybe I am being too sensitive, maybe I'm imagining problems that don't exist, stop and ask yourself this. Are you dismissing your concerns because you genuinely believe they're unfounded? Or are you dismissing them because someone has trained you to doubt yourself? What would you tell a friend who came to you with the same concerns you're having? Would you tell them they're being paranoid, or would you tell them to trust their instincts and investigate further? We're often much better at recognizing unhealthy dynamics in other people's relationships than in our own. That's why community matters. That's why sharing these stories matters. Because when we hear about someone else's experience, we can see the patterns clearly. We can recognize the manipulation tactics. We can validate their reality when they've been told repeatedly that their reality is wrong. And maybe, if you're going through something similar right now, hearing my story will help you trust yourself. Maybe it will give you permission to stop making excuses for someone else's behavior and start taking your own observations seriously. Because here's what I wish someone had told me a year ago. If you feel like you're going crazy in a relationship, you're probably not crazy. You're probably being made to feel crazy. And there's a huge difference. The person who gaslights you will tell you that you're too sensitive, too paranoid, too dramatic, too emotional. They'll say you're remembering things wrong, interpreting situations incorrectly, making problems out of nothing. They'll make you feel like the problem is your perception rather than their behavior. But your perception is usually right. Those inconsistencies you're noticing, they're probably real inconsistencies. Those gut feelings that something's wrong, your gut is probably picking up on real warning signs. That sense that you're not getting the full story, you're probably not getting the full story. I ignored my instincts for months because I'd been conditioned to believe that having doubts about Tyler meant there was something wrong with me, not something wrong with his behavior. Every time I questioned him, he made me feel like the issue was my lack of trust, rather than his lack of trustworthiness. And Natalie's phone call was designed to reinforce that same narrative. She called me clingy, obsessive, unable to let go, stuck in the past. All the things Tyler had apparently been telling me about me. She was giving me the message. Everyone agrees that you're the problem. Your husband thinks you're the problem. I think you're the problem. You should think you're the problem too. But by that point, something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of being called the other woman in my own marriage. Maybe it was the accumulation of too many lies catching up with the truth all at once. Maybe it was just that I'd finally reached my limit of accepting other people's versions of reality over my own. Whatever it was, I decided to stop making excuses and start looking for evidence. And as you'll see in what comes next, once I started actually investigating instead of just accepting what I was told, the truth came together very quickly. So if you're in a situation right now where you're constantly being told that your very reasonable concerns are unreasonable, stop accepting that. Start documenting. Start verifying. Start trusting yourself enough to actually look for the truth instead of just hoping that everything will be okay if you're patient enough, understanding enough, trusting enough. Because sometimes patience isn't a virtue. Sometimes it's just giving someone more time to take advantage of you. And if you stick around for the rest of this story, you're going to see exactly what happens when the person who's been systematically underestimated decides to stop playing the role they've been assigned and start playing to win.
Drop that comment below about your experience with gaslighting. Let's remind each other that we're not alone in this, that our perceptions matter, that our experiences are valid, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is stop asking if you're crazy and start asking if the person making you feel crazy might be the actual problem. Now, let me tell you what I did next with all that evidence I'd gathered. With a complete picture of Tyler's deception laid out before me, I knew that my next moves needed to be calculated and precise. I'd spent years as a strategy consultant helping companies navigate their most difficult challenges. Now it was time to apply that same analytical rigor to my own situation. I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Strategic Response Plan. Then I began breaking down the situation the way I would for any client facing a complex crisis. First, I needed to understand my objectives clearly. This wasn't about revenge in the emotional sense. It was about justice, accountability, and protecting myself legally and financially. Tyler and Natalie had spent 10 months building a false narrative designed to leave me with nothing while they walked away with everything. My goal was to dismantle that narrative before it could be used against me. Objective 1. Secure irrefutable documentation of the affair and the financial deception. I already had the credit card statements, the timeline of charges matching his fabricated calendar entries, and the evidence that his supposed business activities were fictional. But I needed more. I needed proof that this had been systematic and intentional, not just a series of mistakes or a relationship that had accidentally developed. Objective 2. Protect my financial interests. I had funded Tyler's MBA, supported him through launching his business, and maintained our household expenses while he supposedly built his startup. If he filed for divorce using the narrative he and Natalie had constructed, that I was the emotionally unavailable workaholic who had neglected our marriage, he could potentially claim that his business success entitled him to a larger share of our assets. I needed to establish the true financial history of our marriage. Objective 3. Expose the professional misconduct. Tyler had used fictional business activities to cover an affair. He'd lied to his business partner about his whereabouts. He'd potentially violated professional ethics by conducting a personal relationship under the guise of business development. And Natalie had participated in this deception while representing herself as a professional analyst evaluating business proposals. There needed to be consequences beyond just the personal betrayal. I started with the financial documentation. I downloaded 7 years of tax returns, bank statements, and credit card records. Then I created a spreadsheet tracking every major financial contribution I'd made to Tyler's career and our shared life. Tuition payments for his MBA,
$127,000. Living expenses during his 2 years in school, approximately $65,000. Business startup costs I'd covered in the first year of his consulting firm, $43,000. The down payment on our townhouse, which had come entirely from my savings, $85,000. Over 7 years, I'd invested more than $320,000 directly into Tyler's success and our shared life. And that didn't include the opportunity costs, the partnership in Seattle I'd turned down, the consulting practice focused on women-led businesses that I'd postponed, the salary increases I'd missed by staying in Denver for his benefit. Next, I turned my attention to Tyler's business itself. If he was going to try to claim that his consulting firm was a valuable marital asset that he'd built independently, I needed to document my actual contributions. I found emails where I'd introduced him to 3 of his first major clients, messages where I'd reviewed and edited his proposals before he submitted them, calendar entries showing the countless hours I'd spent helping him prepare for presentations and pitch meetings. Tyler's business success wasn't built on his MBA alone. It was built on my network, my expertise, and my unpaid labor. If this went to divorce court, I wanted that contribution documented and quantified. But documentation alone wouldn't be enough. I needed leverage, something that would make Tyler and Natalie understand that their carefully constructed narrative could be dismantled completely if they pushed too hard. That's when I decided to make the call I'd been considering since the previous evening. I pulled up the contact information for Karen Westfield, one of the most respected family law attorneys in Denver. I'd met her 2 years ago at a professional women's networking event, and we'd stayed in casual contact since then. "Amanda Reed," she said when she answered, warmth in her voice. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I've been better," I said honestly. "I need legal advice, and I need it to be completely confidential at this stage." Her tone shifted immediately to professional mode. "Of course. Tell me what's going on." I spent the next 45 minutes walking her through everything: Natalie's phone call, the evidence I'd gathered, the timeline of Tyler's deception, the false narrative they'd been constructing. I sent her the financial documentation, the credit card statements, the proof that his supposed business activities were fictional. Karen was silent for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Amanda, this is one of the most thoroughly documented marital deception cases I've seen from a client's first consultation. Most people come to me with suspicions and fragments. You've brought me a complete file case. I'm a strategy consultant. Being thorough is what I do."
Well, your thoroughness is about to serve you very well. What Tyler and Natalie have done goes beyond simple adultery. They've engaged in financial fraud by using marital assets to fund an affair, while lying about the nature of those expenditures. They've created false business pretenses, and they've attempted to gaslight you into accepting a narrative that would have been used against you in divorce proceedings. She paused, and I could hear her typing. "Here's what I recommend. First, we file for divorce before he does. That puts you in the position of plaintiff rather than defendant, which matters psychologically, even if it doesn't always matter legally. Second, we immediately request full financial disclosure, including all credit cards, bank accounts, and business records. Third, we file a motion to prevent dissipation of marital assets. That stops him from moving money around or making large purchases before the divorce is settled." "What about his business partner?" I asked. "Daniel doesn't know that Tyler has been lying about his whereabouts and activities. Should I tell him?" Karen considered this. "That's a strategic decision. Telling Daniel would expose Tyler's professional misconduct, but it might also complicate things if the business has any value that we need to consider in asset division. Let me think about the timing on that." We spent another 30 minutes discussing strategy, timelines, and potential complications. By the time I hung up, I had a clear plan of action and an attorney who understood exactly what we were dealing with. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more piece of leverage I needed to secure, and it required me to do something I'd been avoiding.
actually confronting the evidence of Tyler's current activities. I pulled up the Riverside Inn's website and found their main number. When the receptionist answered, I took a deep breath and said, "Hi, this is Amanda Reed. My husband, Tyler Reed, is a guest there, and I need to get an important document to him. Could you confirm his room number?" "One moment, please," I heard typing. "Yes, Mr. Reed is in room 312. Would you like me to transfer you to his room?" "No, thank you. I'll just come by in person." I hung up before she could respond. Room 312. Tyler was definitely there, right now, probably with Natalie. The business trip to Austin was completely fabricated, and he was 40 minutes away in Boulder, living a parallel life while telling me he was working. I sat with that confirmation for a moment, feeling the weight of absolute certainty. There was no more room for doubt, no more possibility that I'd misunderstood or overreacted. Tyler had looked me in the eye 3 days ago, kissed me goodbye, and left for what he claimed was a business trip to Austin. He was in Boulder with his mistress. The next call I made was to a private investigator that Karen had recommended. "I need photographic evidence of an affair," I told him, providing Tyler's information and the Riverside Inn details. "How quickly can you get there?" "I can be there within an hour. If they leave the hotel together, I'll document it. If they're staying in tonight, I'll get photos tomorrow morning when they leave." "Perfect. I also need you to verify employment information for someone named Natalie Chen." I stopped myself. I'd been told not to use that name. "Natalie Parker. She works at Summit Ridge Ventures. I need to know if there's any history of professional misconduct or ethics violations." "I'll have a preliminary report to you by tomorrow evening," he confirmed. After hanging up, I created a detailed timeline of events, starting from 10 months ago when Natalie began working at Summit Ridge Ventures and Tyler's calendar suddenly showed increased meetings with the firm. I documented every lie I could verify, every fabricated business activity, every dollar spent on the affair while I was working overtime to maintain our household. The timeline was damning. It showed systematic deception over an extended period, careful planning to create alibis and cover stories, and deliberate manipulation of my trust. This wasn't a spontaneous affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated exit strategy that Tyler had been executing methodically. As evening approached, I made one final decision. I called Daniel Brooks. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Has Tyler's work performance been consistent over the past 10 months? Has he been meeting his client obligations, showing up for scheduled meetings, delivering on his commitments?" There was a long pause. "Amanda, is something wrong? Please just answer the question." Daniel sighed. "Honestly, no. Tyler's been increasingly unreliable. He's missed several client meetings, claiming family emergencies or last-minute conflicts. His work product has been rushed, not up to his usual standards. I've been covering for him because he said you two were dealing with some personal issues and he needed flexibility, but it's been putting strain on the business." "What kind of personal issues did he tell you about?" Another pause. "He said you were having fertility problems, that you were going through treatments and having a hard time emotionally. He made it sound like you needed a lot of support and he was trying to be there for you while also keeping the business running." I closed my eyes, feeling another layer of betrayal settle over me. Tyler had been using our genuine struggle to conceive as a cover story for his affair. He'd told his business partner that I was the one with problems, that I was the one requiring his time and emotional energy, when in reality, he'd been investing all of that in Natalie.
Daniel, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to keep it confidential for now. Tyler hasn't been dealing with family emergencies. He's been having an affair. The missed meetings, the unreliability, the time away from the business, it's all been about maintaining a relationship with someone else. And he's been lying to both of us about where he is and what he's doing. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Finally, Daniel said quietly, "I'm sorry, Amanda. I don't even know what to say.
You don't need to say anything, but you do need to know that Tyler's professional judgment has been compromised. Whatever happens with our marriage, you need to protect yourself and the business. Document everything. Make sure you have clear records of who's responsible for what. And be prepared for things to get complicated. After I hung up, I sat back and reviewed everything I'd accomplished in just over 24 hours. I had comprehensive financial documentation. I had proof that Tyler's supposed business activities were fictional. I had a timeline of systematic deception. I had legal representation. I had a private investigator gathering photographic evidence. And I had begun planting the seeds that would undermine Tyler's professional reputation if he tried to push his false narrative. Tyler and Natalie thought they were playing chess with a naive, trusting wife who couldn't let go and accept whatever narrative they constructed. What they'd actually been playing with was a strategic consultant who had been documenting everything, who knew how to build an airtight case, and who was about to demonstrate that underestimation can be the most expensive mistake you make. My phone buzzed with a text from the private investigator. In position, subjects just entered hotel restaurant for dinner, getting photos now. I looked at the message and felt something I hadn't felt in days. Control. Not over Tyler's choices or Natalie's actions, but over my own response, over my own future, over the narrative that would ultimately be told about what had happened to our marriage. They wanted to paint me as the crazy, clingy wife who couldn't let go. Instead, they were about to discover that I was the woman who had been paying attention all along, who had been keeping receipts, and who was about to make them face the actual consequences of their choices. Tomorrow, Tyler would come home from his fake business trip, and I would be ready. Tyler's car pulled into the driveway at exactly 6:47 p.m. on Thursday evening, right on schedule according to the return flight time he texted me from Austin. I watched from the living room window as he grabbed his carry-on bag from the trunk, the same bag that had never left Colorado, according to the airport parking records I had quietly verified. I had spent the past 3 days preparing for this moment with the same meticulous attention I would give to a high-stakes client presentation. Every piece of evidence was organized. Every question I planned to ask was designed to elicit specific information. Every possible response he might give had been anticipated and countered. The private investigator had delivered his report yesterday. 32 photographs of Tyler and Natalie together at the Riverside Inn, walking into the hotel together, having dinner at the restaurant, leaving for a hike in the mountains, returning to the same room. The images were time-stamped and geotagged, irrefutable proof that Tyler was exactly where he'd said he wouldn't be, with exactly the person he claimed was just a professional contact. I had printed out a selection of the photos and placed them in a manila folder on the coffee table, along with the credit card statements, the calendar showing his fabricated schedule, and the call log from Summit Rich Ventures confirming they'd never seriously considered his business proposal. The front door opened. "Amanda, I'm home," Tyler called out, his voice carrying that familiar tone of tired affection that I now recognized as performance. "In the living room," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. He walked in, setting his bag down by the stairs, loosening his tie in that way he always did after a long day of travel. He looked genuinely exhausted, which made sense considering he'd spent the past 3 days maintaining his elaborate fiction while managing his relationship with Natalie. "How was Austin?" I asked, watching his face carefully. Exhausting. The investor meetings were intense. Lots of tough questions about the business model, the scalability, the competitive landscape. He moved toward the kitchen. "I need a beer. Want anything?" "Actually, I'd like you to sit down first. We need to talk." Something in my tone made him pause. He turned to look at me, and I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face. "Is everything okay?" "Sit down, Tyler." He sat in the armchair across from me, his body language shifting into defensive mode, even though he didn't yet know what he was defending against. "What's going on?" I picked up the manila folder and held it for a moment, letting the weight of what came next settle between us. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them honestly. Can you do that? Amanda, you're scaring me. What is this about? Which hotel did you stay at in Austin? He blinked, thrown by the specificity. The Hilton downtown. Why? And you met with investors from which firms? Lone Star Ventures and Austin Capital Group. The lies came smoothly, built on a foundation of months of practice. Amanda, seriously, what's going on? I opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph. Tyler and Natalie walking into the Riverside Inn together, his hand on the small of her back. I placed it on the coffee table facing him.
The color drained from his face. He stared at the photo, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. "That's the Riverside Inn in Boulder," I said calmly. "Not the Hilton in Austin. Would you like to try again?" I can explain." "No, I don't think you can. But let me help you understand what I know." I pulled out the credit card statements next, the charges highlighted in yellow. "These are from the credit card account you opened 10 months ago, the one you thought I didn't know about. $487 at the Riverside Inn, $243 at Celestial Restaurant, $156 at the Vintage Room Wine Bar. All on dates when you told me you were working late or attending business conferences." Tyler's hands were shaking now. "Amanda, please. I'm not finished." I pulled out the calendar printout showing his fabricated schedule alongside the actual credit card charges. Every hotel charge corresponds to a weekend when your calendar showed an industry conference. Every expensive dinner corresponds to a night marked as client development. You've been systematically lying about your whereabouts for 10 months. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You've been having an affair with Natalie Parker from Summit Ridge Ventures. She called me at 2 a.m. 5 days ago to tell me I was the other woman in my own marriage and that I should let go gracefully so you two could move to San Francisco together. His face went from pale to gray. "She called you? She wasn't supposed to call, so you did know she was planning to contact me. This wasn't a spontaneous confession. This was coordinated." Tyler slumped back in his chair, the fight visibly draining out of him. "How long have you known?" "Does it matter? What matters is that I know everything, Tyler. I know the affair started 10 months ago. I know Summit Ridge Ventures was never seriously considering investing in your startup. I called them myself, and they confirmed they don't even invest in consulting platforms. I know you've been lying to Daniel about your whereabouts, claiming family emergencies when you were actually with Natalie. I know you told him I was having emotional problems related to fertility treatments to cover for your absences. You called the firm? You talked to Daniel?" Now there was panic in his voice, the realization that his professional life was being exposed along with his personal deception. "I did, because I needed to verify whether anything you'd told me over the past 10 months was actually true. And Tyler, almost none of it was. The Morrison case and that other story didn't exist, and neither did your investor meetings, your business development activities, your weekend conferences. You built an entire fictional professional life to cover up an affair." I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the printed emails from his cloud storage showing the half-finished business proposal. "Your startup pitch deck hasn't been updated in 8 months. It's still full of placeholder text and incomplete sections. You were never seriously working on securing investment. You were using the pretense of building a business as a cover story for building a relationship with Natalie." Tyler put his face in his hands. "I never meant for it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go? At what point did this become intentional? When you hired on with a firm she worked at? When you started scheduling meetings with her specifically? When you opened a secret credit card to fund your dates? When you told her intimate details about our marriage that she could use against me?" He looked up, tears in his eyes now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I made terrible choices and I hurt you and I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it. What you can do is tell me the truth, all of it. When did the affair actually start?" He wiped his eyes, taking a shuddering breath. 11 months ago,
right after she started at Summit Ridge Ventures. I went to pitch my startup idea, and she was assigned to do the preliminary evaluation. We had coffee after the meeting to discuss the proposal, and then coffee turned into lunch, and lunch turned into drinks. And you decided to pursue a relationship with her while staying married to me.
I didn't decide anything at first. It just happened. She was young and exciting and impressed by me in a way that felt good to be seen that way. Seen as what? Successful? You do realize that your success was built on my financial support, right? I know. His voice was barely a whisper. I know that, Amanda, but with her, I got to pretend I'd done it all myself. I got to be the self-made entrepreneur, the visionary who'd bet on himself and won. She didn't know about all the times I'd failed, all the times you'd bailed me out, all the times I'd wanted to quit and you'd convinced me to keep going. So, you wanted someone who didn't actually know you, someone who only saw the successful version you'd created. When you put it like that, it sounds shallow. It was shallow, Tyler. You threw away 7 years of partnership for someone who made you feel impressive. And in the process, you decided to destroy my credibility and reputation to justify your exit. He looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and pulled up the recording I had made of Natalie's phone call. Yes, I had recorded it because I'd suspected even then that I would need evidence. Listen to this. Listen to what your girlfriend said to me at 2 a.m. I played the recording, watching Tyler's face as he heard Natalie's voice telling me I was clingy, obsessive, emotionally unavailable, past my prime, holding him back from his true potential. With each cruel phrase, he seemed to shrink further into himself. She wasn't supposed to say those things, he whispered when the recording ended. We'd talked about her calling you, but just to tell you about the relationship, not to what? Not to systematically tear me down? Not to position me as the villain in your story? Tyler, you fed her those talking points. You told her I was clingy and controlling. You told her I didn't support your ambitions. You gave her the ammunition she used against me. I was trying to justify it to myself. When I talked about our marriage to Natalie, I emphasized all the negative things, all my frustrations, all the ways I felt constrained. I needed to believe that leaving you was the right choice, so I constructed a version of our marriage where you were the problem. And now, that false version is what she believes is true. She thinks she's rescuing you from a terrible relationship. She thinks I'm the obstacle to your happiness. Tyler was crying openly now. I've destroyed everything, haven't I? Our marriage, my business partnership with Daniel, my relationship with Natalie, because she's going to realize I lied to her too. Your relationship with Natalie was always built on lies, Tyler. You lied to her about our marriage. You lied about your business success. You lied about your reasons for staying with me. She fell in love with a fictional version of you, just like I apparently married one too. He looked up at me, something like hope flickering in his eyes. Is there any way we can fix this? Any possibility of working through it? I shook my head slowly. No, because even now, sitting here, confronted with all the evidence, you're still trying to manage the narrative. You're still looking for a way to minimize what you did, to make me understand your justifications, to find an angle where you're not completely the villain in this story. I'm not trying to. You are. And that tells me everything I need to know. Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive divorce papers. My attorney has already filed them. You're going to be asked to provide full financial disclosure, including that secret credit card and any other accounts I don't know about. And you're going to cooperate completely, Tyler, because if you don't, all of this evidence, the photos, the credit card statements, the proof that you lied to your business partner, the recording of Natalie's phone call, all of it becomes part of the public court record. His hope died in his eyes. You're really doing this? I'm really doing this.
You spent 10 months systematically deceiving me, building a false narrative about our marriage, and planning an exit strategy that would have left me looking like the emotionally unavailable workaholic who drove you away. Did you really think I'd just accept that version of events? I don't know what I thought. That you'd be hurt but eventually understanding. That we could have an amicable divorce where we both moved on with our lives. An amicable divorce where you got to keep your reputation intact, your business partnership solid, and your assets protected by making me look like the emotionally unavailable workaholic who drove you away? That's not amicable, Tyler. That's calculated. He stood up, pacing now, running his hands through his hair. What do you want from me? I want you to pack a bag and leave tonight. I want you to tell Natalie the truth, all of it, including the parts you lied to her about. I want you to cooperate completely with the divorce proceedings without trying to contest my account of what happened. And I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You don't get to betray someone for 10 months and then walk away cleanly. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. Maybe the Riverside Inn has long-term rates. Maybe Natalie's apartment in the Mission District is ready early. Maybe you can stay with Daniel, though I imagine that relationship is pretty strained right now.
Tyler looked around our living room, his living room too, at least for now, as if seeing it for the first time. Or maybe for the last time. I really did love you, Amanda. That wasn't fake. Maybe you did, in your way. But love without respect, without honesty, without loyalty, that's not really love at all. That's just comfortable companionship until something more exciting comes along. He nodded slowly, defeated. I'll pack a bag. I watched him climb the stairs to our bedroom, listening to him moving around above me, gathering clothes and toiletries for a life that would no longer include me. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief. Just a strange emptiness where 7 years of partnership used to be. 20 minutes later, he came back downstairs with a suitcase and his laptop bag. He paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. I know you are. But you're sorry you got caught, Tyler. You're sorry there are consequences. That's not the same as being sorry for what you did. He left without another word, and I sat in the silence of the townhouse that was about to become just mine. Through the window, I watched his car disappear down the street, taking with it the last remnants of the life we'd built together. My phone buzzed. A text from Karen, my attorney. Papers filed. He'll be served tomorrow morning. Are you okay? I typed back. I'm better than okay. I'm free. And for the first time in 10 months, that was actually true. 6 months after that confrontation in my living room, I found myself sitting in a corner booth at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, looking out at the rain-soaked streets and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about my future. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Tyler had cooperated with the proceedings after realizing that fighting would only make the evidence public and destroy what remained of his professional reputation. The settlement gave me the townhouse, 70% of our joint assets in recognition of my financial contributions to his career, and a structured payment plan where Tyler would reimburse me for the MBA tuition and business startup costs that I'd funded. More importantly, the settlement included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Tyler couldn't publicly discuss the circumstances of our divorce, couldn't blame me for the marriage's failure, couldn't spread the false narrative he and Natalie had constructed. The truth was documented in legal filings, preserved for the record, but not weaponized for public consumption. I wasn't interested in destroying Tyler. I was interested in protecting myself and ensuring that the actual facts would speak louder than his fiction if he ever tried to rewrite history again. The coffee shop where I sat was 3 blocks from the headquarters of Catalyst Strategic Partners, the consulting firm that had offered me a partnership 3 years ago. I'd reconnected with them 2 months into my divorce proceedings,
curious whether the opportunity might still exist. Not only did it still exist, but they'd actually expanded their vision for what the role could be. They wanted me to launch a new division focused on consulting for women-led startups and businesses. It was the exact practice area I dreamed about building years ago, the one I'd postponed to support Tyler's career. And now, at 34, I was finally getting the chance to pursue it. I'd moved to Seattle 2 weeks ago, leaving Denver and all its complicated memories behind. The townhouse had sold quickly, giving me the capital to buy a beautiful loft apartment with views of the water. I was scheduled to start my new position in another week, spending these final days of freedom exploring my new city and reconnecting with the version of myself that existed before I'd made my life so small to accommodate someone else's dreams. My phone buzzed, a text from Karen, my mother. "Settled in yet? Remember, you promised to call this weekend." I smiled and typed back, "Very settled. We'll call Sunday morning. Love you." My family had been incredibly supportive throughout the divorce, though my mother had admitted she'd never quite warmed to Tyler. There was something about the way he talked about his success, she'd said during one of our long phone conversations. Like he'd accomplished everything independently, like you were just a nice addition to his life, rather than the foundation of it. I should have said something. But I was glad she hadn't. If someone had told me 3 years ago that Tyler was taking me for granted, that he was rewriting our shared history to center himself, I probably would have dismissed it. I needed to discover the truth myself, to gather my own evidence, to reach my own conclusions. That's what made my decision to leave feel empowering rather than something I'd been pushed into. My laptop was open in front of me, and I'd been working on something I'd started a few weeks ago. A blog post about my experience, not naming names, not sharing identifying details, but writing about the patterns of gaslighting, financial manipulation, and narrative control that I'd experienced. Writing about how to recognize when someone is systematically undermining your perception of reality. Writing about the importance of documentation, of trusting your instincts, of verifying rather than just accepting. I'd already heard from dozens of women who'd read my earlier posts, sharing their own stories of being made to feel crazy for noticing obvious inconsistencies, for having reasonable concerns, for expecting honesty and respect in their relationships. The response had been overwhelming, and it had given me a new sense of purpose beyond just my professional success.
A notification popped up on my screen. An email from Karen, my attorney. The subject line read, "Thought you'd want to know." I opened it to find a brief message and a forwarded article from a Denver business journal. The headline read, "Local consulting firm announces restructuring after partner departure." The article explained that Tyler had left the consulting firm he'd founded, selling his stake to Daniel Brooks, who would be continuing the business under new leadership. Tyler was described as pursuing other opportunities, which was professional code for forced out. Karen's message was simple. Daniel clearly decided the partnership wasn't sustainable after learning the truth. Thought you'd appreciate knowing that professional consequences followed professional misconduct. I did appreciate it, though not in the vindictive way I might have 6 months ago. I appreciated it because it confirmed that the truth had weight, that documentation mattered, that actions had consequences beyond just personal relationships. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Tyler and Natalie's relationship had imploded within weeks of my confrontation with him. Apparently, Natalie had been furious to learn that Tyler had lied to her as much as he'd lied to me, that his business wasn't as successful as he'd portrayed, that his marriage had ended because of his choices rather than my failures, and that the narrative he'd fed her about our relationship bore little resemblance to reality. She'd felt used and manipulated, which was ironic considering she'd been an active participant in manipulating me. But I supposed everyone is the hero of their own story, and Natalie had genuinely believed she was rescuing Tyler from an unhappy marriage rather than helping him execute a calculated exit strategy. I didn't feel sorry for either of them, but I also didn't waste energy on anger or resentment anymore. They'd made their choices, faced their consequences, and were living with the results. My energy was better spent building my new life. A woman approached my table,
mid-40s, professional attire, holding a coffee cup. "Excuse me, are you Amanda Reed?" I looked up, surprised. "Yes." "I'm Jennifer Hale. I read your blog about recognizing gaslighting in relationships. Your story, it helped me understand what was happening in my own marriage. I gathered evidence like you did, documented everything, and I just filed for divorce last week. I wanted to thank you for sharing your experience. It gave me the courage to trust myself." I gestured to the empty seat across from me. "Please, sit down if you have a minute." She sat, and for the next 20 minutes, she told me her story. Different details, different circumstances, but the same fundamental patterns. A partner who lied systematically, who rewrote history to justify betrayal, who tried to make her doubt her own perceptions and memories. And, like me, she'd reached a breaking point where she decided to stop accepting someone else's version of reality and start investigating the truth. "The hardest part was accepting that someone I loved could be so deliberately deceptive," she said. "I kept wanting to believe there was some misunderstanding, some way to explain it that didn't make him into the villain. But eventually, I had to accept that his actions were exactly what they appeared to be." "That's always the hardest part," I agreed. "We want to believe the best in people, especially people we've committed to. But sometimes believing the best in them means ignoring what they're actually showing us about their character." After Jennifer left, I sat with my thoughts for a while. 6 months ago, I'd been sitting in darkness at 2 in the morning, my world shattered by a phone call designed to break me. Today, I was in a new city, starting a new career, helping other women recognize and escape similar situations. The woman Tyler and Natalie tried to portray, clingy, obsessive, emotionally unavailable past her prime, that woman never existed. She was a fiction created to justify their choices and minimize their guilt. The real woman, the one sitting in this Seattle coffee shop, was competent, strategic, resilient, and perfectly capable of building a life that didn't require shrinking herself to accommodate someone else's ego. I thought about all the women out there who might be going through something similar right now. Women who are being told they're too sensitive, too suspicious, too demanding. Women who are questioning their own memories and perceptions because someone they trust is telling them they're wrong. Women who are making themselves smaller and quieter and less demanding because they've been convinced that their very reasonable expectations are actually character flaws. If there's anything I want you to take away from my story, it's this: trust yourself. When something doesn't add up, when someone's words don't match their actions, when you feel like you're going crazy trying to reconcile what you're being told with what you're observing, you're probably not crazy. You're probably picking up on real inconsistencies that deserve investigation. Document everything. Keep records of financial transactions, save important emails and texts. Note the inconsistencies you observe, not because you're paranoid or controlling, but because memory is fallible and evidence is powerful. If you're wrong, you'll be relieved to discover it. If you're right, you'll have the proof you need to protect yourself. And understand that people who gaslight you aren't just making mistakes or having memory lapses. They're engaging in a deliberate pattern of behavior designed to maintain control and avoid accountability. That's not something you can fix by being more understanding or more accommodating. It's something you need to recognize and respond to with clarity and strength.
Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's refusing to accept someone else's false narrative about who you are. It's gathering evidence and speaking truth. It's building a life that reflects your actual worth rather than someone else's diminished version of you. I'm not going to tell you that everything worked out perfectly for me because life isn't a fairy tale. I spent 7 years of my life in a relationship that turned out to be built on a foundation of lies. I postponed my own dreams and advancement for someone who was secretly planning to leave me while taking credit for the success I'd helped him achieve. That's time and energy I can never get back. But I did get something valuable from the experience: absolute clarity about my own strength, my own worth, and my own judgment. I learned that I'm not naive for trusting someone. Tyler was untrustworthy. I'm not clingy for wanting connection. Tyler was emotionally unavailable. I'm not holding anyone back. Tyler wanted someone who wouldn't hold him accountable. The narrative Tyler and Natalie tried to write about me wasn't true.
And the beautiful thing about truth is that it doesn't require everyone to believe it. It just requires documentation and time. Eventually, the facts speak for themselves. As I packed up my laptop and prepared to leave the coffee shop, I thought about where I'd be if I'd accepted Natalie's 2 a.m. phone call at face value. If I'd believed I was the problem, if I'd accepted their version of events, if I'd let Tyler exit our marriage on his terms with his reputation intact and my contributions erased. I would have questioned myself for years, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed, why I hadn't been enough. I would have carried that false narrative into future relationships, always worried that I was too clingy or too demanding or too focused on my career. Instead, I knew the truth. I had evidence. I had documentation. And most importantly, I had rebuilt my sense of reality on a foundation of facts rather than someone else's convenient lies. To anyone watching this who's been told they're the other woman in their own relationship, who's been called crazy for noticing obvious lies, who's been convinced that their very reasonable concerns are signs of their inadequacy, you're not alone. Your perceptions are probably accurate, your concerns are probably valid, and you have more strength than you realize. Sometimes the woman they try to gaslight is actually the woman who's been documenting everything, who knows how to build an airtight case, and who's about to prove that truth is more powerful than fiction. That was me. And if it needs to be, it can be you too. Trust yourself, gather your evidence, and never let anyone convince you that seeing the truth makes you crazy. Sometimes seeing the truth just makes you the only person in the room who's actually paying attention. And that's not a weakness. That's your greatest strength. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're gonna love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.